The Sorites paradox, often presented as the paradox of a heap, is a disarmingly simple yet profoundly unsettling challenge to our understanding of categories, language, and the nature of truth. It begins with an uncontroversial premise. One grain of sand does not constitute a heap. It then proceeds with a seemingly innocuous, inductive step. If n grains of sand do not constitute a heap, then n plus 1 grains of sand also do not constitute a heap. Through repeated application of this step, one is logically compelled to conclude that even a pile of 1,000,000 grains of sand, or indeed any number, is not a heap. Yet, intuitively, we know that a pile of 1,000,000 grains certainly is a heap. The paradox arises from the incremental nature of change and the inherent vagueness of our linguistic terms. It exposes the arbitrary nature of the boundaries we draw in continuous spectra. Where does not bald become bald? When does cold become warm? At what precise moment does a collection of individual units transition into a collective entity with a new descriptor? The Sorites paradox highlights the limitations of classical binary logic, where propositions must be either true or false, when confronted with concepts that exist on a continuum. It suggests that many of our everyday terms, while seemingly clear in their extreme applications, lack precise, sharp boundaries, leading to a zone of indeterminacy. Philosophers have grappled with this, proposing solutions ranging from fuzzy logic, which allows for degrees of truth, to epistemicism, which argues that a sharp boundary does exist, but we simply cannot know it. The paradox forces us to contemplate whether vagueness is a property of language, a limitation of our knowledge, or an inherent feature of reality itself. It underscores the profound difficulty in mapping the neat categories of our thought onto the messy, continuous flow of existence, compelling us to reflect on the very foundations of our reasoning and the subtle nuances of meaning. The liar paradox, in its starkest and most unsettling form, presents itself with the simple, self-referential declaration: this statement is false. It is a seemingly innocuous string of words, yet within it resides a profound abyss that swallows the very foundations of bivalent logic. If one assumes, as our conventional understanding of truth dictates, that a statement must be either true or false, then the sentence immediately unravels. Should it be true, then, by its own assertion, it must be false, leading to an inescapable contradiction. Conversely, if it is false, then what it asserts, that it is false, is indeed the case, which paradoxically makes it true. The statement thus oscillates endlessly between truth and falsehood, refusing to settle into a definitive logical state. This is not merely a clever linguistic trick. It is a fundamental crack in the edifice of formal systems, language, and even our understanding of reality. The liar paradox challenges the very principle of bivalence, forcing us to question whether every well-formed proposition must possess a determinate truth value. It highlights the inherent limitations of language when it folds back upon itself, attempting to describe its own nature or status. Thinkers have grappled with its implications for centuries, from ancient Greece to contemporary analytic philosophy. Some propose that such statements are simply meaningless, failing to express a coherent proposition in the first place, thus escaping the jurisdiction of truth and falsity. Others suggest multi-valued logics or hierarchical systems, like Tarski's truth hierarchy, where statements about truth can only be made from a metalanguage, thereby preventing self-reference at the same logical level. Yet, the raw force of the paradox persists, reminding us that there are conceptual boundaries beyond which our usual logical tools falter, revealing a deeper, perhaps irreducible, tension between language, truth, and the elusive nature of meaning itself. It stands as an enduring monument to the fragility of our logical constructs when confronted by the recursive intricacies of thought. The omnipotence paradox, famously crystallized in the stone paradox, poses a question that is at once simple and profoundly unsettling. Can an omnipotent being create a stone so heavy that even it cannot lift it? This seemingly innocuous query, often directed at theological concepts of God, immediately bifurcates into two equally problematic conclusions, each striking at the very heart of omnipotence. If the omnipotent being can create such a stone, then it necessarily ceases to be omnipotent, for there now exists a stone it cannot lift. Conversely, if it cannot create such a stone, it again ceases to be omnipotent, for there is something it is incapable of doing. In either scenario, the concept of absolute, unconstrained power appears to collapse under its own weight, revealing an inherent logical contradiction within the very definition. This paradox compels a rigorous philosophical reevaluation of what omnipotence truly means. The common philosophical and theological response asserts that omnipotence refers to the ability to do anything that is logically possible. An omnipotent being can perform any feat imaginable, provided that the feat itself does not involve a logical contradiction. Creating a stone that an omnipotent being cannot lift is, by definition, a logical impossibility. It's not a thing that can be done or not done, but rather a meaningless conjunction of terms. To ask an omnipotent being to perform a logically impossible task is akin to asking it to make 2 + 2 = 5. It's a nonsensical request, not a test of power. The paradox, therefore, reveals less about a limitation of divine power and more about the limits of our conceptual language when attempting to describe such power. It forces us to confront whether logic itself is an external constraint upon even the most supreme being, or if logical coherence is simply the inherent grammar by which existence, including divine existence, must necessarily operate. The paradox does not diminish power, but refines our understanding of its boundaries, suggesting that true omnipotence is not the capacity for incoherence, but the boundless capacity within the realm of the logically conceivable. The ancient quandary, etched into the Platonic dialogues, posits a fundamental challenge to the very foundation of divine command theory and, by extension, the nature of morality itself. It asks, with disarming simplicity yet profound implication, is something pious or good because the gods love it, or do they love it because it is pious? This seemingly innocent question, posed by Socrates to Euthyphro, unveils a relentless logical bind. If one asserts that an action is good because God commands it, the second horn, then morality becomes arbitrary. God, in this view, could command anything, torture, deceit, genocide, and it would, by virtue of that command, instantly become good. This renders the concept of God's goodness meaningless, for to say God is good would merely be to say God commands what God commands, a tautology devoid of moral content. It strips away any rational basis for praising God's moral character, as there's no independent standard against which to judge divine decrees. The moral landscape becomes a shifting, unpredictable terrain, dependent solely on divine caprice, undermining human reason and intuition about justice and compassion. Conversely, if one claims that God commands an action because it is inherently good, the first horn, then goodness exists independently of God. This implies that there is an external, objective moral standard to which even the divine is beholden. God, then, is no longer the ultimate source of morality, but rather its discoverer, its communicator, or perhaps its enforcer. This challenges notions of divine omnipotence and absolute sovereignty, suggesting that God operates within pre-existing moral parameters, much like a mathematician discovering truths that exist irrespective of their will. The divine becomes, in essence, subject to a higher law, diminishing the traditional understanding of an all-powerful, all-encompassing deity. The Euthyphro Dilemma, therefore, forces a difficult choice. Either morality is arbitrary and potentially abhorrent, or God is not the ultimate or sole fount of all goodness. It remains a cornerstone of philosophical and theological debate, a timeless intellectual crucible that continues to refine our understanding of ethics, divine nature, and the intricate relationship between the two. The problem of evil stands as perhaps the most enduring and agonizing challenge to the classical monotheistic conception of God. It is a stark, relentless question, articulated most famously in various forms, including Epicurus's ancient formulation. If God is omnipotent, all-powerful, omniscient, all-knowing, and omnibenevolent, all-good, why does evil exist in the world? The mere presence of suffering, in its myriad forms, seems to contradict one or more of these divine attributes. Consider the three pillars. An all-good God would desire to prevent evil. An all-powerful God would be able to prevent evil. And an all-knowing God would be aware of all evil. Yet evil persists both in its moral manifestations, the cruelty perpetrated by humans upon each other, the injustices, the wars, the genocides, and in its natural guises. Earthquakes, tsunamis, diseases, famines, the suffering of innocent children and animals. If God is truly all three, then why are these horrors not only permitted, but seemingly woven into the very fabric of existence? The intellectual tension is immense, leading to profound existential questions. If God is able, but unwilling to prevent evil, then God is not truly good, but rather malevolent or indifferent. If God is willing but unable, then God is not all-powerful, but impotent. If God is both willing and able, then the very existence of evil becomes an inexplicable paradox, a logical inconsistency that threatens to unravel the entire theological framework. Various attempts, known as theodicies, have been made to reconcile this apparent contradiction. The free will defense posits that moral evil is a necessary byproduct of granting humanity genuine freedom, a greater good that outweighs the suffering it might cause. Soul-making theodicies suggest that suffering is not gratuitous, but rather a crucible for character development, empathy, and spiritual growth. Other arguments appeal to divine mystery, asserting that our finite minds cannot comprehend God's ultimate plan, or that evil serves a greater, albeit inscrutable, good. Yet, for many, these responses fall short, particularly in the face of gratuitous or seemingly meaningless suffering. The problem of evil is not merely an abstract philosophical puzzle. It is a deeply felt human cry, a question born of lived pain and observed injustice, demanding a coherent and compassionate answer from the heart of faith and reason alike. It forces a profound contemplation on the nature of divine justice, human suffering, and the very meaning of existence in a world stained by sorrow. The ancient whisper of this debate reverberates through the very chambers of human consciousness, questioning the essence of our agency. At its core, it is a profound inquiry into whether our choices are truly self-generated, originating from an autonomous I, or if they are but the inevitable unfolding of a vast, unbroken chain of prior causes. Determinism posits that every event, including every thought, feeling, and action, is the inexorable consequence of antecedent conditions and the fundamental laws governing the universe. If we trace the lineage of any decision, a determinist might argue, we would find it rooted in our genetic predispositions, our environmental conditioning, the complex interplay of neurochemical processes in our brains, or even the grand cosmic dance initiated at the dawn of time. Under this lens, the sensation of choosing becomes a sophisticated internal simulation, a subjective experience of a process that was, in truth, always destined to occur. Our future is, in essence, already written, not by a divine hand, perhaps, but by the relentless logic of cause and effect. Yet, juxtaposed against this mechanistic vision is the potent, lived experience of free will. We feel, with an almost undeniable certainty, that we could have chosen differently. The weight of moral responsibility, the sting of regret, the pride in achievement, these concepts seem to dissolve into meaninglessness if our actions are merely the determined output of a cosmic algorithm. If we are not truly free, then how can we be held accountable? How can justice, blame, or even love retain their profound significance? The very idea of self-improvement, of striving to be better, relies on the assumption that we possess the capacity to alter our trajectory. This tension births a deep philosophical chasm. Can genuine freedom exist within a universe governed by immutable laws? Some attempt to bridge this divide through compatibilism, suggesting that free will merely means acting according to one's desires without external coercion, even if those desires themselves are determined. But for others, the incompatibility remains stark, forcing us to confront a disquieting truth. Either our intuitive sense of freedom is an elaborate illusion, or the deterministic fabric of the cosmos is not as absolute as it appears. This unresolved enigma continues to shape our understanding of self, morality, and the very nature of existence. In the ancient sun-drenched climes of Elia, Zeno wove a conceptual snare designed to ensnare our very understanding of motion, space, and time. His paradox of Achilles and the tortoise, seemingly simple, hides a profound philosophical challenge. Imagine Achilles, the swiftest of warriors, racing a tortoise that has been given a small head start. Intuitively, we know Achilles will easily overtake the tortoise. Yet, Zeno invites us into a meticulous, unsettling dissection of the race. For Achilles to catch the tortoise, he must first reach the point where the tortoise began. But by the time Achilles arrives at that initial mark, the tortoise, having continued its slow but steady pace, will have moved a tiny, new distance. Now, Achilles must traverse this new distance to catch up. But again, by the time he covers that segment, the tortoise will have moved yet another infinitesimally smaller distance. This process, Zeno argues, continues indefinitely. Achilles is always confronted with a new, ever-diminishing gap to close. He must, in essence, traverse an infinite number of ever smaller distances in a finite amount of time. How? Zeno asks implicitly, can one complete an infinite task? The paradox exposes a deep-seated problem with the assumption that space and time are infinitely divisible continua. If between any 2 points there lies an infinite number of other points, then any journey, no matter how short, requires the traversal of an infinite series of locations. This intellectual knot suggests that motion itself is an illusion, a conceptual impossibility if our understanding of infinity is applied without nuance to physical reality. While calculus later provided a mathematical solution, demonstrating that an infinite series of decreasing positive numbers can indeed converge to a finite sum, thereby explaining how motion is mathematically consistent, Zeno's true genius lay not in denying motion, but in exposing the profound philosophical difficulties inherent in our common-sense notions of continuity and infinity. He forced thinkers to grapple with the conceptual tools they use to understand the world, revealing the potential for logic to lead to conclusions that defy empirical experience. The paradox remains a potent reminder that our most fundamental assumptions about reality, about how space unfolds, how time flows, and how objects move through them, are ripe for critical examination, revealing the subtle yet powerful ways in which our intellectual frameworks shape our perception of the very fabric of existence. A whisper of cosmic irony, a ripple in the fabric of what we understand as sequential reality, the grandfather paradox poses one of the most elegant and unsettling challenges to the very notion of time travel. It posits a scenario where an individual journeys into the past to prevent an event crucial to their own genesis, perhaps to prevent their grandfather from meeting their grandmother, or to somehow ensure he never fathers their parent. The immediate, chilling implication is that if this act is successful, the time traveler, by definition, would never have been born. Consequently, they could not have undertaken the journey through time in the first place. This creates an inescapable causal loop, a self-defeating logical knot that seems to unravel the very possibility of altering history. At its heart, the paradox is a profound meditation on causality. It demands that we confront the rigid, unidirectional flow we perceive as cause preceding effect. If the effect, the time traveler's existence, is prerequisite for the cause, the alteration of the past, then the entire sequence collapses into an abyss of non-existence. It suggests that the past, far from being a fluid canvas awaiting revision, might be an immutable, perhaps even predetermined edifice. Philosophically, the grandfather paradox invites us to ponder the nature of free will within a potentially fixed temporal landscape. If one cannot alter the past, because such alteration would negate the very agency performing the act, does it imply that all events, including our decisions, are already woven into an unchangeable tapestry of time? Or does it hint at a more complex, perhaps multidimensional, reality where altering the past doesn't erase one's origin, but merely branches off into a new, parallel timeline, leaving the original causality intact? This many-worlds interpretation offers a potential escape, a way to reconcile the paradox without denying the possibility of temporal displacement, by suggesting that each choice, each intervention, creates a new universe where that choice's consequences play out. Yet, even with such sophisticated conceptual frameworks, the grandfather paradox remains a haunting query. It forces us to question the very coherence of a universe where one could effectively erase their own foundational moment. It is a testament to the intricate, often unforgiving logic of existence, reminding us that tampering with the deepest currents of time might not merely be difficult, but inherently contradictory to the very laws that govern being and becoming. It underscores the humbling realization that some boundaries, perhaps those defining our very origin, might be inviolable, not by external force, but by the very logic of their own unfolding. A subtle, yet equally profound, cousin to the grandfather paradox, the Bootstrap Paradox presents a different kind of temporal conundrum, not of erasure, but of infinite recursion, of an object or information existing without an apparent origin. Imagine a scenario where a time traveler receives a book, perhaps a rare philosophical treatise or a musical score. Enchanted by its contents, they decide to travel into the past and present the very same book to a younger version of themselves, or to the very person who supposedly authored in the first place. The younger self eventually grows up, studies the book, and then, in turn, travels back to complete the loop, delivering the book to their past self. The question that inevitably arises is, who wrote the book? Who composed the music? Who invented the object? It seems to have no beginning, no original creator. It simply exists within the loop, an orphan of causality. This paradox challenges our most fundamental assumptions about creation and originality. In our linear Causal Effect universe, everything has an origin point, a first cause, a moment of genesis. The Bootstrap Paradox utterly defies this, suggesting the possibility of artifacts or knowledge arising ex nihilo from within the temporal flow itself. It implies a universe capable of self-sustaining information, where concept or an object, once introduced into the loop, becomes its own progenitor. Philosophically, it forces a reevaluation of what it means for something to be created. If a piece of knowledge, say a complex scientific theory, is learned from a future self and then passed back through time, becoming the very source of its own discovery, does it diminish the ingenuity of the discoverer? Or does it suggest that certain truths are not so much discovered as they are revealed through the mechanics of time itself, existing as inherent properties of the cosmos waiting to be unfolded? The Bootstrap Paradox weaves a captivating tapestry of circular causality, a closed loop where cause and effect chase their own tails, forever entwined. It hints at a strangely deterministic universe where certain items or ideas are destined to exist without a conventional beginning, forever cycling through time. It's a testament to the strange, often counterintuitive possibilities that arise when the rigid linearity of time is bent or broken, inviting us to contemplate a reality where some things simply are, not because they were made, but because they have always been, in a peculiar temporal sense, their own origin. It is a reminder of the deep mysteries that lie beneath the surface of our perceived reality, where the very act of existing can become its own paradoxical explanation. A perplexing knot in the fabric of reality, where cause and effect fold back upon themselves, forming an inescapable circuit. It is a phenomenon that defies the conventional, linear progression of time, suggesting instead a cyclical, self-sustaining mechanism where an event is simultaneously its own progenitor and progeny. Consider the Bootstrap Paradox, a classic manifestation. An object, or perhaps information, appears seemingly from nowhere, having been sent back in time to its own origin point. The object exists, yet it has no ultimate external cause. It simply is, born from its future self. This intricate entanglement challenges our fundamental understanding of temporality and causality. If an event causes itself, where does true origination lie? The implications are profound, touching upon determinism versus free will. If the future already contains the seed of its own past, are our choices merely predetermined echoes within this recursive system? A causal loop invites us to contemplate a universe where events are not merely sequential dominoes falling, but rather an intricate, self-reinforcing dance. It suggests a closed system, hermetically sealed from external influence, where the very act of its unfolding defines its initial conditions. This concept is not merely a theoretical curiosity. It forces a re-evaluation of agency. If a scientist invents a time machine because their future self sent them the blueprints, who truly invented the machine? The very act of questioning becomes part of the loop. It paints a picture of a reality less about discrete moments and more about an eternal, self-referential present, where every now contains the echoes and harbingers of its own existence. Such a loop, if truly instantiated, would dissolve the rigid boundaries between past, present, and future, collapsing them into a singular, eternal recurrence, a cosmic Ouroboros of becoming. It is a concept that whispers of a universe less about beginnings and endings, and more about an infinite, self-contained becoming. The philosophical unease stems from the apparent lack of an uncaused first cause. If everything within the loop is both cause and effect, then the traditional search for an ultimate origin point dissolves into an infinite regress that is simultaneously a closed circle. This challenges our very cognitive framework, which tends to seek linearity and distinct points of creation. The very notion of novelty or genuine creation becomes suspect within such a system, as all information and matter appear to be eternally recycled within the loop itself. It forces a radical reimagining of what it means for something to exist or originate, suggesting that perhaps existence is not a linear journey from a point A to point B, but rather an infinitely self-sustaining vibration, a timeless echo chamber where all moments are inherently connected and mutually dependent. The loop, then, becomes not just a temporal anomaly, but a profound statement on the inherent interconnectedness of all phenomena, a statement that perhaps the universe, in its deepest essence, is its own self-fulfilling prophecy. A quintessential mindbender, a thought experiment designed by William Newcomb that lays bare the deepest tensions between rationality, free will, and the perplexing nature of prediction. Imagine a being, an omega, capable of predicting your choices with near-perfect accuracy. Before you stand two boxes. Box A, transparent and containing a visible $1,000, and Box B, opaque and containing either $1 million or nothing. Omega has already made its move. If Omega predicted you would take both boxes, Box B is empty. If Omega predicted you would take only Box B, then Box B contains the million. You, the player, now face the choice. The core of the paradox lies in the conflict between two compelling lines of reasoning. On one hand, the principle of utility maximization suggests you should take only Box B. If Omega is truly a perfect predictor, then taking only Box B is the only path to the $1 million. Omega would have foreseen taking both and left Box B empty. Your current choice, therefore, seems to be a signal to Omega's past prediction. On the other hand, the principle of dominance dictates that you should take both boxes. The money, whether a million or nothing, is already in box B. Your decision now cannot change what has already been placed there. Therefore, taking both boxes guarantees you at least the $1,000 from box A, plus whatever is in box B, potentially $1 million, making it the dominant strategy regardless of box B's contents. The paradox forces us to confront the nature of causality and free will. If Omega's prediction is infallible, does that imply a deterministic universe where your choice is already fixed? If so, is choosing only box B truly a choice, or merely the playing out of a predetermined sequence? Or is your free choice capable of somehow influencing Omega's past action, a form of backward causation? It shatters our intuitive understanding of decision-making, where one typically maximizes present utility without worrying about an omniscient being's prior actions. Newcomb's paradox reveals the limits of classical decision theory when confronted with perfect foresight, forcing a profound contemplation on whether true rationality lies in embracing the seemingly counterintuitive path dictated by probability and past prediction, or the straightforward logic of immediate gain. It is a mirror held up to our cognitive biases, reflecting the deep unease we feel when our agency appears to be merely an echo of a future already known. The Raven Paradox, or Hempel's Paradox, beckons us into a disquieting dance with the very fabric of empirical knowledge and the elusive nature of confirmation. At its heart lies a deceptively simple logical equivalence. The universal statement, all ravens are black, is logically equivalent to its contrapositive, all non-black things are non-ravens. If these two propositions are indeed logically interchangeable, then any evidence supporting one must, by extension, support the other. Herein lies the unsettling twist. Observing a black raven intuitively confirms the hypothesis that all ravens are black. However, by this same logic, observing a green apple, a non-black, non-raven object, should also provide confirmatory evidence for the hypothesis. The paradox arises from the profound counterintuitiveness of this conclusion. Our common sense rebels against the notion that a green apple, utterly unrelated to ravens in our minds, could somehow strengthen our belief about the color of all ravens. This thought experiment plunges us into the depths of confirmation theory, challenging our understanding of what constitutes meaningful evidence. It forces us to confront the limitations of purely logical frameworks when applied to the messy, contingent world of empirical observation. Does the paradox reveal a flaw in our intuitive grasp of induction, or a deficiency in the very formalisms we use to model knowledge? Some philosophers argue that while logically sound, the confirmation provided by a non-black, non-raven object is infinitesimally small compared to the vastness of the universe of non-ravens, thus rendering it practically negligible. Others point to the role of background knowledge and prior probabilities, suggesting that we implicitly assign higher likelihoods to observing relevant instances. The Raven paradox persists as a subtle, yet potent reminder that the relationship between observation, logic, and the confirmation of universal truths is far more intricate and less transparent than we often presume, urging us to question the very foundations upon which we build our understanding of the world. The tale of Buridan's ass, often recounted with a wry smile, conceals within its simple narrative a profound and unsettling philosophical quandary, a thought experiment that probes the very essence of rationality, free will, and the mechanics of decision-making. Envision an ass, perfectly positioned equidistant between two equally appealing and equally accessible piles of hay. The ass, being a creature of pure rationality for the sake of the paradox, possesses no basis whatsoever to prefer one pile over the other. Every reason that speaks for the left pile speaks with equal force for the right. Paralyzed by this perfect symmetry of desire and reason, the ass, according to the paradox, would starve to death, unable to make a choice. This tragicomic scenario illuminates a deep tension between deterministic rationality and the necessity of action in a world that rarely offers such pristine equipoise. If our choices are always predicated on the strongest reason or the greatest good, what happens when reasons are perfectly balanced? Does it imply a complete paralysis of the will? The paradox challenges the principle of sufficient reason, which posits that everything must have a reason for being as it is and not otherwise. Here, there is no sufficient reason for choosing one pile over the other. For humanity, the Buridan's dilemma resonates with our own experiences of indecision, where equally compelling options can lead to a state of internal deadlock, a kind of existential paralysis. It suggests that pure reason alone may be insufficient for navigating the complexities of life, hinting at the necessity of an arbitrary leap, an intuitive nudge, or even a degree of irrationality to break the symmetry and allow action to occur. Perhaps true freedom lies not in always choosing the best option, but in the very capacity to choose, even when reason offers no clear path, affirming a spontaneity that transcends mere logical calculus. The Trolley Problem, a stark and unsettling thought experiment, plunges us into the heart of moral philosophy, forcing an uncomfortable confrontation with the calculus of human life. It presents a scenario where a runaway trolley is hurtling down tracks, poised to kill 5 people. You stand beside a lever that, if pulled, will divert the trolley to another track, saving the 5, but at the cost of one person who is tied to that alternate track. The dilemma, deceptively simple in its setup, immediately bifurcates ethical reasoning. On one hand, the utilitarian calculus beckons. 5 lives saved outweighs 1 lost. This consequentialist perspective argues that the morally correct action is the one that produces the greatest good for the greatest number, making the lever pulling a regrettable but necessary choice. Yet, an unsettling unease often accompanies this rational conclusion. The act of deliberately choosing to sacrifice one, even to save many, feels inherently wrong to many, touching upon deontological principles. These principles suggest that certain actions are intrinsically right or wrong, regardless of their outcomes. Is actively causing a death, even indirectly, morally permissible? The problem forces us to consider the distinction between allowing harm to occur and actively perpetrating it. The famous variation, where one must push a large man off a bridge to stop the trolley, further amplifies this moral tension. While the outcome, 1 death to save 5, remains numerically identical, the visceral act of directly pushing a person invokes a profound psychological and ethical revulsion that the impersonal pulling of a lever often does not. This highlights the intricate interplay between our rational ethical frameworks and our deeply ingrained moral intuitions, revealing the discomfort we feel when agency and direct action lead to a chosen death, even for a purportedly greater good. The Swamp Man thought experiment, conceived by the philosopher Donald Davidson, delves into the profound question of personal identity, the nature of consciousness, and the role of history in defining who we are. Imagine Davidson himself, walking through a swamp, when a bolt of lightning strikes a nearby tree, simultaneously vaporizing the original Davidson and, in a miraculous feat of molecular rearrangement, creating an exact atom-for-atom replica of him. This replica, the Swamp Man, instantly appears possessing the exact physical structure of Davidson, including the precise neural configuration of his brain at that very moment. The crucial question Davidson poses is this: is Swamp Man Davidson? Does he possess Davidson's memories, his beliefs, his intentions, his identity? Davidson's provocative answer is no. He argues that while Swamp Man is physically identical, he lacks the crucial causal history that defines genuine mental states and, by extension, personal identity. A memory, for instance, is not merely a neural configuration. It is a product of a past experience, a causal chain linking the present brain state to an actual event in the world. Swamp Man has a brain state as if he remembers walking through the swamp yesterday, but he did not actually perform that action yesterday, nor did he have the preceding experiences that built up to that moment. His memories, are not genuine recollections, but merely brain states that mimic them without the necessary causal genesis. The same applies to beliefs, intentions, and desires. They are not isolated phenomena, but are embedded in a continuous, causally connected narrative of interactions with the world. This experiment challenges purely physicalist or functionalist views of identity that might argue that if it looks like Davidson and acts like Davidson, it is Davidson. Swampman suggests that being a person, having a mind, and possessing a unique identity are inextricably linked to a life lived, a history of experiences, and the intricate web of causal relationships that shape our inner lives, extending far beyond a mere molecular snapshot. It forces us to contemplate the deep, irreducible significance of one's unique journey through time in the very constitution of the self. Consider, if you will, the disquieting image, a solitary brain, suspended in a nutrient-rich solution, its neural pathways meticulously connected to a supercomputer. This machine, of unimaginable power, feeds the brain a meticulously crafted stream of sensory data, sights, sounds, textures, even the subtle pangs of hunger or joy. For this brain, there is no external world as we understand it. Its entire lived experience, its memories, its loves, its very sense of self, are nothing more than electrical impulses generated by a sophisticated simulation. The rain on its face, the laughter of a friend, the scent of morning coffee, all are perfect, indistinguishable from genuine experience, yet entirely fabricated. This thought experiment, the brain in a vat, is not merely a sci-fi conceit. It is a profound philosophical crucible, a test for the very foundations of our knowledge and our understanding of reality. It forces us to confront the radical possibility that everything we hold to be true about the world, its solidity, its independence, its objective existence, could be an elaborate, exquisitely rendered illusion. How, indeed, could such a brain ever discern its predicament? Its perceptions, however vivid, offer no internal clue to their artificiality. Every piece of evidence it might gather to confirm its reality would simply be another programmed input. The implications are vast and unsettling. Epistemologically, it dissolves the bedrock of empirical knowledge. If our senses can be so perfectly deceived, what then can we truly know? How can we distinguish between genuine experience and its flawless simulation? Metaphysically, it blurs the line between the subjective and the objective, challenging the very notion of an external, mind-independent reality. If the world is merely a projection, then its existence becomes contingent upon the programmer, or even upon the very act of being experienced by the brain. It is a solipsistic nightmare, albeit one where the dreamer is a captive participant. The brain in a vat stands as a stark reminder of the limits of our perception and the ever-present shadow of radical skepticism, a perpetual whisper that perhaps, just perhaps, we are all living within the confines of someone else's elaborate dream. The simulated reality hypothesis posits not merely the deception of a single mind, as with the brain in a vat, but the radical notion that our entire universe, in its breathtaking vastness and intricate detail, is itself an artificial construct, a sophisticated computer simulation. This is not to suggest we are disembodied brains perceiving a fabricated world from an external vantage, but rather that we, our bodies, our thoughts, the very laws of physics governing our reality, are all native elements within the code of this colossal program. It invites us to consider the universe as an emergent property of computation, a grand algorithm unfolding across eons. The core argument, perhaps most famously articulated by Nick Bostrom, suggests a probabilistic inevitability. If advanced civilizations are capable of creating incredibly realistic ancestor simulations, detailed historical reconstructions populated by conscious beings, and if these civilizations do not typically destroy themselves before reaching such technological prowess, then the number of simulated realities would vastly outnumber the single base reality. Consequently, the odds that we inhabit one of these numerous simulations become overwhelmingly high. It is a cosmic inversion of perspective, shifting our perceived reality from fundamental to derivative. The philosophical echoes of this hypothesis resonate deeply. Metaphysically, it reorients our understanding of existence itself. What is the nature of the base reality in which the simulation is run? Is there a programmer or a team of creators? And if so, what are their motivations or purposes? This concept brushes against ancient theological questions, offering a new framework for considering a prime mover or a transcendental intelligence. Existentially, it challenges our sense of agency and free will. Are our choices predetermined by code, or can genuine consciousness and volition arise within a simulated environment? The implications for meaning and purpose are profound. Are our struggles and triumphs merely data points in a grand experiment, or do they hold intrinsic value even within a computational framework? The simulated reality hypothesis compels a reevaluation of what is real, what is conscious, and what it means to be within a universe that might just be lines of code whispering into being. The enigmatic thought experiment of Schrödinger's cat stands as a haunting allegory for the perplexing nature of quantum mechanics, particularly its implications for our understanding of reality itself. Conceived by Erwin Schrödinger in 1935, it was not intended as a serious proposal for an actual experiment, but rather a reductio ad absurdum, a vivid illustration of the measurement problem and the absurdity that arises when quantum superposition is scaled from the subatomic realm to the macroscopic world. Within a sealed, opaque box, a cat is placed alongside a diabolical device, a vial of poison gas, rigged to release if a single radioactive atom decays. The crucial point is that, according to quantum mechanics, until observed, the atom exists in a superposition of states, both decayed and undecayed simultaneously. Consequently, the cat, inextricably linked to the atom's fate, is said to exist in a superposition of being both dead and alive at the very same instant. This is not merely a state of ignorance, where we simply don't know the cat's condition. Rather, the quantum formalism suggests a genuine indeterminacy, a blurred reality where the cat possesses no definitive state until an observation is made. The paradox begs the profound question: when does this superposition collapse? When the Geiger counter clicks? When a human observer opens the box? Does consciousness play a role in collapsing the wave function and forcing reality into a definite state? The cat, for a period, inhabits a liminal space between existence and non-existence, a ghostly duality that defies our classical, intuitive grasp of objective reality. It forces us to confront the unsettling possibility that reality, at its deepest level, is not fixed and independent of observation, but somehow participatory, shaped by the very act of being perceived. The experiment, therefore, serves as a philosophical mirror, reflecting back our own assumptions about the universe and challenging the very foundations of what it means for something to be real. It remains a potent symbol of the profound conceptual chasm between the microscopic quantum world and our everyday macroscopic experience. Russell's paradox, formulated by the philosopher and mathematician Bertrand Russell in 1901, struck at the very heart of naive set theory, threatening to unravel the logical foundations of mathematics itself. Prior to this discovery, set theory, championed by George Cantor, seemed a robust and intuitive framework. A set was simply a collection of objects, and any definable property could be used to form a set. Russell, however, exposed a fatal flaw in this seemingly straightforward concept through a simple, yet devastating, thought experiment concerning self-reference. He considered the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. Let's call this set R. The paradox arises when we ask, does R contain itself? If R contains itself, then by its own definition, as the set of all sets that do not contain themselves, it should not contain itself. This leads to an immediate contradiction. Conversely, if R does not contain itself, then by its definition, as the set of all sets that do not contain themselves, it should contain itself. Again, a contradiction. This seemingly innocuous question reveals a fundamental logical inconsistency, a self-referential loop that generates an irresolvable antinomy. The implications were profound. If such a simple, seemingly valid construction could lead to a paradox, then the entire edifice of mathematics, built upon the bedrock of set theory, was vulnerable to collapse. It demonstrated that not every definable property could legitimately form a set, and that an unrestricted comprehension principle was untenable. Russell's paradox necessitated a radical rethinking of set theory, leading to the development of axiomatic systems like Zermelo-Fraenkel set theory, ZF, which introduced rigorous rules and restrictions to prevent such paradoxes from arising. It remains a powerful testament to the delicate nature of logical consistency and the unforeseen pitfalls of unbridled abstraction in the pursuit of foundational truths. The unexpected hanging paradox, a labyrinthine twist of logic and anticipation, unwinds a profound meditation on the limits of reason, the nature of knowledge, and the very fabric of surprise. It begins innocuously enough. A judge informs a condemned man he will be hanged on one weekday next week, but the execution will be a complete surprise. The prisoner, a creature of logic, immediately commences his descent into the rabbit hole of deduction. He reasons that the hanging cannot occur on Friday, for if it were to be postponed until the last possible day, its arrival would be entirely predictable, stripping it of its promised element of surprise. With Friday logically eliminated, he extends his chain of reasoning. Thursday, too, becomes an impossibility. If the hanging had not occurred by Thursday, and Friday is already ruled out, then Thursday would be the only remaining option, rendering it, again, not a surprise. This regress continues, day by day, until the prisoner concludes, with an air of triumphant certainty, that the hanging cannot happen at all. He has, it seems, logically disarmed the judge's decree. Yet, herein lies the exquisite sting of the paradox. When the hangman arrives, say, on a Wednesday, the event is indeed a genuine surprise to the prisoner, precisely because his impeccable logic had led him to believe it impossible. The judge's original statement, that the hanging would be unexpected, is thus affirmed, not refuted, by the actual occurrence. This unravels the very foundation of the prisoner's reasoning, exposing a deeper tension. The paradox does not simply highlight a flaw in the prisoner's specific deduction, but rather exposes a fundamental boundary in the predictive power of logic when confronted with self-referential conditions. It probes the validity of predictions that depend on the hearer's knowledge of the prediction itself, questioning whether true surprise is an objective quality of an event or a subjective state of mind contingent upon prior belief. The very act of knowing the prediction seems to nullify its conditions, yet the event's actualization retroactively validates them. This creates a peculiar loop where certainty breeds uncertainty, and the negation of an event becomes the very condition for its unexpected realization. It suggests that certain truths, especially those concerning future events contingent on subjective knowledge and the passage of time, might resist pure logical preemption, revealing the inherent boundaries of intellect when confronted with the emergent nature of reality and the subtle interplay between information, expectation, and experience. The paradox whispers of a reality where absolute certainty about the future can be an illusion, especially when that certainty is forged from the very conditions it seeks to predict, ultimately affirming that some experiences, by their very definition, must transcend pure rational foresight. The Sorcerer's Apprentice Paradox, often vividly imagined through Goethe's poem and Disney's animation, offers a profound allegory for the perilous dance between nascent power and profound ignorance. It paints a chilling portrait of a world where the ability to initiate a process far outstrips the capacity to control or terminate it. The apprentice, brimming with youthful hubris and a superficial grasp of magic, animates a broom to fetch water, seeking to alleviate his mundane chores. He possesses just enough knowledge to set the enchantment in motion, to awaken a force, but critically lacks the deeper wisdom, the counterspell, the nuanced understanding required to halt its relentless progression. The broom, an obedient automaton, performs its task with alarming efficiency, fetching water until the very dwelling is threatened with inundation. The apprentice's subsequent actions only compound the catastrophe. In a desperate attempt to regain control, he resorts to brute force, cleaving the broom in two. Yet, instead of cessation, the magic, now fragmented, merely replicates its effect. Each splintered piece springs to life as a new, equally relentless water-bearer. The problem does not diminish, but multiplies, transforming a single, manageable force into an uncontainable legion. Philosophically, this narrative transcends a mere cautionary tale against dabbling in unfamiliar arts. It resonates as a potent metaphor for the inherent dangers of technological hubris, unbridled innovation, or the wielding of any significant power without commensurate foresight and ethical grounding. It speaks to the unintended consequences that ripple from actions initiated without a holistic understanding of their potential repercussions. Consider the development of artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, or even complex economic systems. The initial spark of creation, the spell, might be relatively simple, yet the emergent behaviors, the self-replicating complexities, or the unforeseen side effects can quickly spiral beyond human intervention, much like the proliferating brooms. The paradox serves as an enduring reminder that true mastery lies not merely in the ability to begin, but, crucially, in the wisdom to know when and how to stop, to regulate, and to comprehend the full life cycle of a created force, lest one drowns in the very current one sought to command. It is a timeless warning against the seductive allure of partial knowledge and the catastrophic potential of unleashing forces one cannot fully comprehend or contain. The ancient Greek tale of Protagoras, the esteemed sophist, and his student Euthyphro, unfurls not merely as a legal dispute, but as a profound philosophical knot, a contemplation on the limits of language, contract, and justice itself. The agreement was elegantly simple, yet harbored a recursive poison. Euthyphro, having studied rhetoric under Protagoras, would pay his master only upon winning his very first case. Euthyphro, however, never took a case, leaving Protagoras unpaid. Exasperated, Protagoras sued his former student, thereby initiating Euthyphro's first case, and thus the paradox. Protagoras presented his argument with chilling logic. If Euthyphro loses this case, then by the court's decree, he must pay me. If he wins this case, then this is his first victory, and by the terms of our original contract, he must pay me. Therefore, in either scenario, Euthyphro must pay. The argument appears watertight, an inescapable conclusion. But Euthyphro, a student of the master himself, countered with an equally compelling, equally self-referential logic. If I lose this case, then I have not won my first case, and according to our contract, I owe Protagoras nothing. If I win this case, then the court will have ruled in my favor, absolving me of payment. Therefore, in either scenario, I do not have to pay. Here lies the exquisite dilemma. Both arguments, internally consistent, lead to mutually exclusive conclusions. The court, caught in this logical vice, could not render a judgment without immediately invalidating its own premise or the very contract it was meant to uphold. The paradox exposes the slipperiness of defining first in a self-referential loop, where the act of adjudication becomes part of the condition it seeks to resolve. It is a meditation on the fragility of definitions, the inherent ambiguity of language when pushed to its conceptual limits, and the unsettling realization that some logical structures, particularly those involving self-reference, can yield an irresolvable truth, forcing us to confront the boundaries of formal reasoning in the messy reality of human affairs. It suggests that even law, meant to bring order, can sometimes be ensnared by the very cleverness of its own construction. Within the austere landscape of mathematical logic, Loeb's theorem stands as a beacon illuminating the profound intricacies of self-reference and provability. It is a deeper, more generalized sibling to Gödel's incompleteness theorems, delving into the very capacity of a formal system to reason about its own demonstrability. At its heart, the theorem states that if a sufficiently powerful formal system, like Peano arithmetic, can prove that the provability of statement A implies the truth of A expressed as prov, then the system can, in fact, prove A itself. Imagine a logical system capable of introspecting, of considering propositions about what it itself can prove. Loeb's theorem essentially says that such a system cannot simply assert, if I can prove this statement, then this statement is true, without already being able to prove that statement outright. The system isn't allowed the shortcut of merely believing its own provability implies truth without having done the legwork of proving the truth itself. This isn't merely a technicality. It strikes at the heart of epistemic self-justification within formal structures. Consider the philosophical implications. It speaks to a fundamental limitation in the self-awareness of any sufficiently complex logical entity. A system cannot grant itself absolute authority on the truth of a proposition merely by linking its provability to truth. It must first earn that truth through direct proof. If a system were to prove prov, it would then be compelled by Loeb's theorem to prove, thereby demonstrating a deep-seated constraint on how a system can meta-reason about its own capabilities. It reveals a recursive entanglement where the act of asserting a conditional relationship between provability and truth necessitates the very truth it seeks to conditionally confirm. This theorem underscores the inherent humility embedded within formal systems. They cannot bootstrap themselves into a higher level of certainty or self-validation. Their power remains tethered to the direct demonstration of truth, rather than merely the assertion of their own capacity to demonstrate it. The new riddle, put forth by Nelson Goodman, doesn't challenge whether induction works, but rather which predicates or concepts are projectable. It delves into a deeper, more unsettling problem than Hume's original query, confronting the very nature of our descriptive language and its entanglement with our inductive practices. Consider the predicate grew, defined as something that is green before a specific future time, t, and blue thereafter. Similarly, bleen would be blue before t and green after. Now imagine we observe countless emeralds, all of them green. Our inductive habit leads us to conclude all emeralds are green. Yet Goodman points out every emerald observed as green before time t is also, by definition, grew. Thus, the same body of evidence that supports all emeralds are green also equally supports all emeralds are grew. The conundrum arises because, while we intuitively find all emeralds are green to be a law-like generalization suitable for projection into the future, all emeralds are grew strikes us as absurd, a mere accidental regularity at best. Yet, logically, the observed evidence offers no preference. This forces us to confront why certain predicates, like green or blue, seem natural or well-behaved for induction, while others, like grew or bleen, appear artificial and unprojectable. Goodman suggests that the difference lies in the entrenchment of our predicates. Those that have been frequently used in past successful projections become, in a sense, validated by their history of use. This implies that our inductive practices are not purely empirical deductions from raw data, but are deeply structured by our existing conceptual scheme and linguistic habits. The new riddle reveals the profound dependence of induction on our chosen descriptive framework, hinting that even our most fundamental scientific laws are not simply found in nature, but are constructed, in part, through our language and its history. It exposes a circularity not in the justification of induction itself, but in the justification of which inductions are valid, pushing us to question the very neutrality of our observational categories. The problem of induction, articulated with chilling clarity by David Hume, represents a fundamental skeptical challenge to the very foundation of empirical knowledge and scientific reasoning. It asks, What rational justification do we possess for believing that the future will resemble the past? We constantly operate under this assumption that the sun will rise tomorrow, that fire will burn, that gravity will continue to pull objects downwards. Our entire lived experience and scientific endeavor are predicated upon the uniformity of nature. But, Hume argued, this belief is not grounded in reason. He dissected the two primary modes of reasoning, deductive and inductive. Deductive arguments, such as those in mathematics or logic, guarantee the conclusion if the premises are true. They're necessarily true. However, inductive inferences are not deductive. There is no logical contradiction in imagining a world where the sun fails to rise tomorrow, or where fire suddenly freezes water. The past performance of an event, no matter how consistent, does not logically necessitate its future occurrence. Then, could induction be justified empirically? This, Hume contended, will be circular reasoning. To argue that induction has worked in the past, and therefore will work in the future, is precisely to employ induction itself. We would be using the very principle we seek to justify as its own justification. Thus, any attempt to justify induction either deductively or empirically falls short. Hume's conclusion was profound and disquieting. Our belief in the uniformity of nature, and consequently our reliance on induction, is not a product of reason, but of custom or habit. Repeated observations of cause and effect relationships simply create a psychological expectation in us that these patterns will continue. We feel certain they will, but we lack a rational reason for that certainty. The problem of induction does not claim that induction fails to work, nor that we should cease to use it. Rather, it strips away any rational underpinning for our confidence in its continued success, leaving us to acknowledge that our most fundamental beliefs about the world are ultimately rooted in an unproven leap of faith, a mere psychological propensity rather than logical necessity. It remains, to this day, one of philosophy's most enduring and unanswered challenges. At first glance, it appears almost innocuous, a simple logical construct, yet its implications ripple through the very foundations of formal logic and our understanding of truth itself. Unlike its more famous cousin, the liar paradox, Curry's paradox, also known as the if-then paradox, does not rely on negation. Instead, it posits a self-referential statement of a particular form. If this sentence is true, then P, where P can represent any arbitrary proposition imaginable. The insidious brilliance lies in how, through seemingly undeniable logical steps, this simple construction can be used to prove P to be true, no matter how absurd or false P might actually be. Imagine the statement, if this very sentence is true, then pigs can fly. Let's call this entire statement S. If we assume S is true, then by the very premise of S, if S is true, then pigs can fly. Since we just assumed S is true, the antecedent of the conditional, if S is true, is satisfied. Therefore, by modus ponens, the consequent, pigs can fly, must also be true. But wait, we have just demonstrated that if S is true, then pigs can fly. This is precisely what S itself states. Thus, S is true if and only if pigs can fly. And since we just showed that if S is true, then pigs can fly, it follows that pigs can fly. The absurdity is immediate and profound. This paradox, discovered independently by Haskell Curry and others, unveils a critical vulnerability in systems that permit unrestricted self-reference and certain basic logical principles like contraction, if a dash v, then a dash b, and modus ponens. It suggests that if we allow such statements to exist within our logical framework, then the distinction between truth and falsity collapses. Everything becomes provable, and thus, nothing is truly proven. The paradox challenges our intuitive grasp of implication, the very notion of a conditional statement, and the limits of what can be consistently asserted within a language or formal system. It forces a contemplative pause, urging us to reconsider the boundaries of truth, the inherent dangers of systems that can comment on their own veracity, and the delicate balance required to construct a logical world that does not fall prey to its own internal contradictions. It is a quiet testament to the fragility of our most fundamental intellectual tools. To contemplate Hilbert's hotel is to confront the terrifyingly beautiful counterintuitiveness of infinity, a concept that stretches the very fabric of our finite human understanding. Imagine a grand hotel, not merely vast, but truly infinite, possessing an endless sequence of rooms, each meticulously numbered, and every single one of them occupied. Our earthly experience dictates that a full hotel can accommodate no more. Yet, here's where Hilbert's thought experiment begins to unravel our common sense. A new guest arrives, a lone traveler seeking lodging. The manager, undeterred by the hotel's apparent fullness, simply announces over the intercom, "Would the guest in room 1 please move to room 2, the guest in room 2 to room 3, and so on. For every guest in room, please move to room N+1." In an infinite hotel, every guest has a new room to move into, and crucially, room 1 becomes vacant. The new guest is thus comfortably accommodated. Our intuitive notion of full is shattered. The infinite set of occupied rooms can still contain a space for an additional element, without expanding its physical dimensions. The paradox deepens when an infinite bus, teeming with infinitely many new guests, pulls up to the hotel. Again, our finite minds would declare utter impossibility. But the manager, ever resourceful, issues a new directive. "Would the guest in room 1 please move to room 2, the guest in room 2 to room 4, the guest in room 3 to room 6, and for every guest in room N, please move to room 2. This ingenious maneuver ensures that all the previously occupied rooms now hold guests in even-numbered rooms, leaving all the infinitely many odd-numbered rooms completely empty. The infinite bus of new guests can then simply occupy these newly vacated odd-numbered rooms. This profound thought experiment, conceived by the mathematician David Hilbert, is not a logical contradiction in the strict sense, but rather a profound revelation about the nature of actual infinity. It demonstrates that infinite sets behave radically differently from finite ones. They defy our common-sense notions of more and less, full and empty. It shows that a proper subset of an infinite set, like the odd numbers, or even the numbers greater than 1, can have the same cardinality as the original set. Hilbert's hotel forces us to shed our anthropocentric, finite-bound intuitions and embrace the strange, boundless logic of the transfinite, illustrating that in the realm of the infinite, there is always room for more, a concept both humbling and exhilarating in its implications for the universe itself. The Dunning-Kruger Effect unveils a profound paradox nestled within the landscape of human cognition, that ignorance, in its most insidious form, often masks itself as certainty. It posits that individuals with low ability at a task often overestimate their own competence, while, conversely, those with high ability tend to underestimate theirs. The very skills required to perform competently are often the same skills needed to recognize competence in oneself and others. Thus, the less one knows, the less one is equipped to perceive the vast ocean of what remains unknown, leading to a confident, albeit unfounded, sense of mastery. It is a cruel twist of metacognition, where the tools for self-assessment are precisely what are lacking. This phenomenon sketches a stark portrait of the human condition, where the shadow of nascent understanding can be mistaken for the full illumination of insight. For the novice, a few glimmers of perceived knowledge can create an illusion of comprehensive understanding, leading to an unwarranted conviction in their judgments. They dwell in a comfortable, albeit confined, epistemic bubble, unaware of the profound complexity that lies beyond their immediate horizon. This isn't merely a matter of arrogance, but often a genuine, unreflexive unawareness of one's own limitations. On the other end of the spectrum, the true expert, having navigated the intricate labyrinth of their discipline, comes to intimately understand the sheer immensity of its unsolved problems and the countless nuances they once overlooked. Their journey has revealed not just answers, but an ever-expanding vista of questions. This deep immersion cultivates a profound humility, a recognition that every solved problem often births a dozen new ones, leading to an understandable, though sometimes self-deprecating, assessment of their own mastery. The more one truly knows, the more vast and terrifying the abyss of the unknown appears. The Dunning-Kruger Effect, therefore, does not merely describe a cognitive bias. It speaks to a deeper philosophical truth about the nature of wisdom. It suggests that true understanding is often accompanied by a profound awareness of one's own fallibility and the boundless nature of knowledge itself. It is a quiet invitation to intellectual humility, reminding us that the journey toward wisdom begins not with knowing, but with the profound recognition of how much we do not yet comprehend. The observer effect beckons us into a profound philosophical contemplation on the very nature of reality and our intricate, inseparable relationship with it. At its core, it describes how the act of observing or measuring a phenomenon inevitably influences or alters that phenomenon, even if subtly. This concept finds its most startling and counterintuitive manifestation in the realm of quantum mechanics, where the mere act of measurement can cause a particle's wave function to collapse, transforming a superposition of possibilities into a single, determinate state. Here, the observer is not a detached, passive spectator, but an active participant in shaping the experienced reality. Yet, the philosophical reverberations of the observer effect extend far beyond the subatomic. They permeate our understanding of consciousness, epistemology, and the inherent limits of objectivity. If the act of knowing inevitably reshapes what is known, can we ever truly apprehend a pristine, unadulterated reality? Is the universe, as we perceive it, not merely a given, but a co-created tapestry woven by the interplay of existence and awareness? This raises an unsettling question about the very foundation of empirical inquiry. How can we be certain that what we are studying is an independent truth rather than a construct influenced by our investigative lens? Consider its parallels in the human sciences. The Hawthorne effect, where individuals alter their behavior simply because they know they are being observed. The therapeutic encounter, where the very act of self-reflection under scrutiny can catalyze transformation. Or the social experiment, where the researcher's presence, however minimal, subtly shifts the dynamic. In these contexts, the observer is not merely witnessing a pre-existing truth, but is part of the unfolding narrative, a catalyst in the very process they seek to understand. The observer effect thus strips away the illusion of a purely objective, external reality, inviting us instead into a more participatory universe. It suggests that reality, at some fundamental level, is not merely out there, waiting to be discovered, but is continually being brought into being through interaction, perception, and consciousness. It is a potent reminder that we are not separate from the cosmos we inhabit, but intrinsically woven into its fabric, each act of observation a subtle, yet profound, act of co-creation. The placebo effect, a subtle whisper from the depths of human consciousness, stands as a profound testament to the mind's intrinsic power, a quiet rebellion against the rigid confines of purely mechanistic understanding. It is not merely a trick of the light or a fleeting illusion, but a deeply embedded truth about the intricate dance between belief and biology. When an inert substance, a sugar pill, or a saline injection, elicits a genuine physiological response, pain relief, reduced nausea, even improved immune function, we are confronted with the undeniable influence of expectation, hope, and the ritual of healing itself. This phenomenon challenges the very notion of objective reality in health, suggesting that our internal narrative, our anticipation of betterment, can quite literally rewrite the body script, demonstrating a profound permeability between the subjective and the somatic. Consider the act of taking a pill. It is not just a chemical entering the bloodstream. It is an act imbued with meaning, a symbol of care, a promise of restoration. This symbolic weight, the trust placed in the healer, the institution, or the perceived efficacy of the treatment, activates a cascade of internal processes: the release of endorphins, the modulation of neural pathways, the subtle shifts in autonomic function. It is a profound demonstration that the body is not merely a machine, but a responsive canvas for the mind's projections, a theater where the drama of expectation unfolds into tangible physiological change. The placebo effect reminds us that healing is often a co-creation, a collaborative venture between the material intervention and the immaterial force of belief. It unveils a dimension where the perceived future, the hoped-for outcome, can manifest in the present, blurring the lines between what is imagined and what is real. In its quiet power, it beckons us to reconsider the boundaries of consciousness, the enigmatic connection between thought and flesh, and the inherent capacity for self-regulation that lies, often dormant, within each of us, awaiting the spark of intention or the gentle nudge of hope. It suggests that reality, at least the reality of our internal well-being, is far more fluid and amenable to subjective influence than many scientific paradigms might concede. It is a reminder that the story we tell ourselves about our health can, quite literally, become our biological reality, shaping the very fabric of our lived experience from within. It speaks to a deeper interconnectedness, a recognition that the perceived world is always, in some measure, a reflection of our internal landscape. If the placebo effect offers a glimpse into the mind's benevolent power, the nocebo effect serves as its shadow twin, a stark reminder of consciousness's capacity for self-inflicted harm, a dark mirror reflecting our deepest anxieties back upon the flesh. It is the chilling phenomenon where a harmless substance or a benign expectation of negativity elicits genuine, often debilitating symptoms: pain, nausea, dizziness, or a worsening of existing conditions. Here, the very act of believing in potential harm, the subtle suggestion of adverse effects, can conjure physiological distress from mere anticipation. It stands as a testament to the profound vulnerability of our embodied minds, how easily the edifice of well-being can be eroded by the insidious whispers of fear and doubt. This psychological alchemy reveals a disturbing truth. Just as hope can heal, fear can wound. The nocebo effect underscores the perilous influence of negative suggestion, whether from a well-meaning but ill-phrased warning, a misinterpretation of information, or the pervasive anxiety fostered by societal narratives of illness. It is not simply hypochondria. It is a complex psychoneurobiological cascade, where the brain, primed for threat, translates perceived danger into tangible suffering. The body, a highly sensitive instrument, reacts not to an external aggressor, but to the internal construction of one. This unravels the neat distinction between real and imagined illness, revealing how the mind can architect its own pathology, creating symptoms that are no less agonizing for being born of expectation rather than objective pathology. The nocebo effect forces us to confront the immense responsibility inherent in communication, particularly in contexts of health and healing. It highlights the fragile boundary between the subjective and the somatic, demonstrating how our conceptualization of vulnerability can physically manifest, turning abstract fears into lived realities. It is a somber reflection on the human condition, a testament to the mind's awesome power, not only to construct worlds of solace, but also to inadvertently conjure prisons of pain, simply by believing in their existence. It reminds us that the narrative of our own fragility can, ironically, become the very blueprint for our suffering, binding us to a reality shaped by apprehension. The Backfire Effect, a curious and often disquieting facet of human cognition, illuminates the profound and sometimes impenetrable walls we construct around our most cherished beliefs. It describes the phenomenon where, when confronted with evidence that directly contradicts one's deeply held convictions, an individual may not only reject the disconfirming information, but emerge from the encounter with an even stronger, more resolute belief in their original, erroneous stance. This is not merely a failure of logic or an oversight. It is a testament to the intricate and often irrational architecture of the human mind, where the pursuit of coherence and the defense of identity can eclipse the objective search for truth. One might ponder the psychological underpinnings of this resistance. At its core lies cognitive dissonance, the uncomfortable mental tension experienced when holding two or more conflicting beliefs, ideas, or values. Rather than adjusting the pre-existing belief, which might necessitate a painful reevaluation of one's worldview or even self-identity, the mind employs various defense mechanisms. The new, contradictory information is not merely dismissed. It is actively reinterpreted, rationalized away, or even perceived as a direct attack, prompting a defensive hardening of the original position. Beliefs, especially those imbued with moral weight or social affiliation, become extensions of the self, and an assault on a belief is felt as an assault on one's very being. This effect reveals a deeper truth about the human psyche's yearning for stability and certainty in a chaotic world. Facts, in this context, are not neutral arbiters of reality, but rather tools or threats to a pre-existing narrative. The Backfire Effect thus complicates the very notion of rational discourse and the efficacy of evidence-based persuasion, suggesting that merely presenting facts is often insufficient and can even be counterproductive when dealing with deeply entrenched convictions. It underscores the intricate dance between cognition, emotion, and identity, hinting at the profound difficulty of truly changing a mind when that mind perceives truth not as an external landscape to be explored, but as an internal fortress to be defended. The Streisand Effect, a contemporary phenomenon amplified by the digital age, unveils a profound irony in the dynamics of information control. It describes the paradoxical consequence where an attempt to suppress, censor, or hide information inadvertently leads to its far wider dissemination and public attention. What begins as a discreet act of concealment often ignites a wildfire of curiosity, transforming a minor, obscure detail into a global spectacle. It is a testament to the inherent human drive for discovery, the allure of the forbidden, and the decentralized power of networked communication. One might contemplate the philosophical underpinnings of this curious reversal. At its heart lies the ancient allure of the forbidden fruit, where that which is explicitly hidden or denied becomes inherently more desirable and intriguing. The act of suppression itself serves as an unwitting beacon, drawing attention to precisely what was intended to remain obscure. In a pre-digital era, such attempts at control, though imperfect, held more sway due to centralized information gatekeepers. However, the Internet, with its myriad interconnected nodes, user-generated content, and instantaneous global reach, fundamentally alters this power dynamic. Every individual with a device becomes a potential publisher, an archivist, and a conduit for information, making monolithic control an increasingly futile endeavor. The Streisand Effect thus underscores a fundamental shift in the landscape of power and transparency. It reveals the hubris inherent in believing one can unilaterally dictate what information is accessible or what narratives can take root. Instead, attempts at censorship are often met with a collective, almost immune response from the network public, who, driven by curiosity, a sense of justice, or simply the thrill of defiance, actively work to circumvent and expose the very content being suppressed. This phenomenon is a powerful reminder that in the age of omnipresent connectivity, the act of attempting to silence can, paradoxically, become the loudest possible announcement, transforming a whisper into an unignorable roar. The quiet tragedy of the bystander effect unfolds within the liminal space, where individual agency dissolves into collective inaction, a peculiar alchemy of human presence that perversely diminishes the likelihood of aid. It speaks to a profound paradox. The more eyes that witness distress, the less likely a singular hand is extended in help. This phenomenon is not born of malice, but of a complex interplay of diffusion of responsibility, where the burden of action is perceived to be shared among all present, thus belonging to no one in particular. Each individual, observing others in action, may succumb to pluralistic ignorance, mistakenly assuming that the absence of response signifies that the situation is not truly an emergency, or that someone else is more qualified or already taking charge. The air becomes thick with unspoken questions, with each gaze subtly seeking permission from another's stillness, creating a frozen tableau of collective paralysis. It is a poignant commentary on the fragile nature of our social contracts and the subtle pressures of conformity. In a crowd, the inherent empathy that might compel immediate assistance can be diluted, becoming a shared, yet unexpressed, current beneath the surface. The anonymity offered by numbers can paradoxically strip away the personal imperative to intervene, transforming a direct plea for help into an abstract spectacle. One might ponder the erosion of individual moral conscience when faced with the perceived collective non-response, how the comfort of blending in can outweigh the discomfort of witnessing suffering. The bystander effect reveals a fissure in the communal fabric, a moment where proximity breeds distance, where visibility begets invisibility. It forces a philosophical confrontation with the very essence of human connection and our innate, yet often suppressed, drive to alleviate suffering, challenging us to consider the ethical weight of our mere presence and the silent complicity of inaction in the face of need. The insidious tendrils of confirmation bias weave through the very fabric of human cognition, subtly shaping perception and distorting the pursuit of truth. It is not merely a preference for agreement, but a deeply ingrained predisposition to selectively seek, interpret, favor, and recall information in a manner that validates pre-existing beliefs, hypotheses, or worldviews. This cognitive shortcut, while offering the comforting illusion of consistency, simultaneously constructs an echo chamber for the mind, sealing it off from dissonant realities and challenging perspectives. The world, through the lens of confirmation bias, becomes a mirror reflecting one's own convictions, rather than a window offering new vistas of understanding. One might contemplate the profound implications of this bias for the very nature of knowledge and rationality. If our minds are predisposed to filter reality through the sieve of what we already believe, then genuine objectivity becomes an elusive phantom, and the path to intellectual growth is perpetually fraught with self-imposed limitations. It is a testament to the human aversion to cognitive dissonance, the discomfort that arises when confronted with information that contradicts deeply held beliefs. Rather than engaging with the challenging data, the mind, in its quest for internal harmony, often chooses to dismiss, reinterpret, or simply ignore it, thus reinforcing the existing paradigm. This process not only perpetuates individual blind spots, but also fuels collective misunderstandings, contributing to the polarization of ideas and the hardening of ideological divides. It serves as a humbling reminder of the inherent biases embedded within our very mechanisms of thought, urging a contemplative vigilance in the ongoing, often arduous, pursuit of genuine inquiry and comprehensive understanding. A recognition that the most profound truths may lie precisely where our biases least expect them. The human mind, in its ceaseless quest for internal coherence, often finds itself navigating a landscape fraught with contradictions. Cognitive dissonance is that unsettling tremor, that profound discomfort, which arises when two or more of our cherished beliefs, attitudes, or behaviors stand in stark opposition to one another. It is not merely a logical inconsistency, but an emotional and existential unease, a disruption in the delicate architecture of our self-perception. Consider the individual who values environmental stewardship yet drives a gas-guzzling vehicle, or the one who believes in absolute honesty yet tells a white lie to avoid conflict. The mind, abhorring this internal friction, immediately seeks resolution. This resolution can manifest in various subtle and often unconscious ways. We might change one of the conflicting cognitions, perhaps by convincing ourselves that the gas guzzler is an unavoidable necessity, or that the lie was for a greater good. Alternatively, we might add new, consonant cognitions to justify the discrepancy, such as focusing on other environmental efforts one makes. Sometimes the easiest path is to trivialize the inconsistency, to diminish its importance, effectively shrugging off the moral weight of the contradiction. Less frequently, but perhaps most profoundly, one might genuinely alter a behavior or belief to align with the other, though this often requires significant self-reflection and effort. The phenomenon underscores our deep-seated need for psychological consistency, a fundamental drive to maintain a cohesive narrative about ourselves and the world. It reveals the intricate dance between our ideals and our actions, and the often deceptive alchemy by which we preserve our self-image, even at the cost of confronting uncomfortable truths. It is a testament to the mind's ingenious, if sometimes self-deceptive, strategies for maintaining equilibrium in a world that rarely conforms to our neat internal categories. There is a peculiar and potent magic in expectation, an unseen current that can subtly bend reality to its own design. The self-fulfilling prophecy describes precisely this phenomenon, a prediction or belief, initially perhaps without foundation, that, by its very enunciation or adoption, brings about its own verification. It is an insidious loop where perception shapes behavior, and behavior, in turn, validates the initial perception, creating a closed system of confirmation. Consider a teacher who, for whatever reason, believes a particular student is destined for failure. Unconsciously, this belief might lead to less encouragement, fewer opportunities, or a more critical evaluation of the student's efforts. The student, sensing this subtle negativity, may become demoralized, lose confidence, and consequently underperform, thus proving the teacher's original, unfounded belief. This dynamic extends far beyond individual interactions, permeating social structures, economic forecasts, and even the unfolding of historical events. A rumor of a bank's insolvency, if widely believed, can trigger a run on deposits, making the bank insolvent. A societal stereotype, deeply ingrained, can influence the opportunities and treatment afforded to a group, leading to behaviors that seem to confirm the stereotype. This concept challenges the notion of purely objective reality, suggesting that our subjective interpretations and expectations possess a profound, often unconscious, capacity to sculpt the world around us. It reveals the intricate web of cause and effect woven by our beliefs, and the quiet, often unacknowledged, power we wield in co-creating the very futures we anticipate, for better or for worse. It is a profound philosophical mirror reflecting the circularity of human experience, where what we expect to find, we often, inevitably, create. The Pygmalion Effect unveils a profound aspect of human interaction, the alchemical power of expectation to sculpt reality. Much like the ancient myth of Pygmalion, who, through fervent belief, willed his ivory sculpture Galatea to life, so too do human expectations, when directed toward others, possess a generative force. This is not merely a psychological curiosity, but a deep commentary on the intersubjective fabric of existence, where belief transcends passive observation to become an active, formative agent. When a teacher holds a silent conviction that a student possesses untapped brilliance, or a leader implicitly trusts in the latent capacity of their team, that belief often becomes an invisible current, subtly reshaping the environment. It alters the nature of communication, amplifies opportunities for growth, and transmits a pervasive sense of confidence. The gaze of expectation, rather than being neutral, is a powerful shaper. It operates through a complex dance of conscious and unconscious cues. A certain tone of voice, a lingering glance, the assignment of more challenging tasks, or the simple act of providing more constructive feedback. These subtle signals convey the underlying conviction, and the recipient, sensing this implicit faith, often internalizes it. Consciously or not, they begin to align their self-perception, their effort, and ultimately their performance with the projected potential. This phenomenon suggests that human potential is not a fixed, static entity, but something fluid, perpetually shaped by the mirror of others' perceptions and the echoing resonance of their expectations. The Pygmalion Effect thus beckons us to consider the weighty responsibility inherent in our interactions, urging us to recognize the profound power we wield in shaping the realities, and indeed, the very selves of those around us, simply by the nature of what we expect them to be. It is a quiet testament to the co-creative aspect of human being, where the imagined future can, with sufficient conviction, draw itself into the present, compelling us to question the origins of our own limitations. The illusory truth effect exposes a disconcerting vulnerability within the architecture of the human mind, its subtle yet powerful tendency to conflate familiarity with veracity. It posits that the mere repeated exposure to a statement, regardless of its intrinsic factual accuracy, can incrementally inflate our subjective belief in its authenticity. This is not a conscious, logical process of verification, but rather an insidious byproduct of cognitive fluency. When information is encountered multiple times, its processing becomes easier, smoother, requiring less cognitive effort. The mind, in its inherent drive for efficiency, tends to misattribute this ease of processing, this feeling of rightness, to an inherent truthfulness. It subtly confuses the comfort of recognition with the certainty of fact, the ease of processing with the weight of truth. This phenomenon casts a profound and often unsettling shadow over our understanding of truth itself. It suggests that truth, in the human experience, is not solely a product of rigorous empirical verification or sound logical inference, but can also be, alarmingly, a construct of mere repetition. It implies that the landscape of our beliefs is not a pristine garden cultivated solely by reason, but a territory perilously susceptible to the relentless drip of reiteration. In an age of ubiquitous information and rapid dissemination, particularly through digital channels and social media, the implications are staggering. Propaganda, misinformation, and even casual falsehoods, when endlessly echoed within echo chambers or through relentless news cycles, can gain a perilous, unearned legitimacy simply through their pervasive presence. The illusory truth effect thus compels us to confront the inherent fragility of our epistemic defenses. It highlights the mind's tendency to gravitate towards the comfortable and the familiar, even if that comfort masks a deception. It is a quiet testament to the sheer power of mere exposure, a stark reminder that the pathways of our beliefs can be paved not just by evidence, but by sheer iteration. To resist its pervasive pull requires a constant, conscious effort to question, to verify, to interrupt the seamless flow of familiar assertions and subject them to the harsh, often uncomfortable, light of critical scrutiny, lest our internal world becomes merely a comfortable echo chamber of repeated fictions. The labyrinthine corridors of human connection, woven with the delicate threads of understanding, often lead not to unequivocal liberation, but to a peculiar, vexing bind, the paradox of empathy. It posits that while the capacity to feel with another, to vicariously inhabit their joy or sorrow, is fundamental to our social fabric and moral compass, it also harbors intrinsic vulnerabilities and potential for detriment. One might imagine empathy as a double-edged sword. On one side, it forges profound bonds, fostering altruism and collective action, illuminating the shared human condition. Yet, the other edge can inflict a subtle wound. To truly empathize is to open oneself to the suffering of another. And in doing so, one risks emotional exhaustion, a vicarious trauma that can lead to burnout or a crippling sense of helplessness. The very act of absorbing another's pain can deplete the empathizer, rendering them less effective in offering tangible aid, transforming compassionate engagement into a form of shared paralysis. Furthermore, the paradox unveils a darker, more insidious facet. Empathy is often selective, tending to gravitate towards those who resemble us, those within our immediate social circles or identifiable groups. This inherent bias can inadvertently solidify in-group/out-group distinctions, fostering a moral myopia where the suffering of the distant or the dissimilar is rendered invisible or less pressing. It can lead to a focus on individual plight at the expense of systemic injustice, a preference for the emotionally resonant story over the complex, impersonal data that might reveal broader societal ills. The profound intimacy of empathy, while beautiful, can thus become a barrier to universal compassion or strategic, far-reaching beneficence. It whispers to us of personal connection, but might deafen us to the cries of the multitude, or even be exploited, weaponized, by those who seek to manipulate our emotional responses. The paradox compels us to question whether the purest form of feeling, untamed, can sometimes betray the very ideals it purports to serve, demanding a more tempered, perhaps more cognitive, form of compassion to truly navigate the moral landscape. The human heart, in its perpetual quest for contentment, often finds itself ensnared upon an invisible, yet relentless, mechanism, the hedonic treadmill. This philosophical and psychological concept posits that despite significant positive or negative life events, individuals tend to return to a relatively stable baseline of happiness. Imagine a runner on a treadmill. They exert immense effort, moving forward with determination, yet remain in the same place. Similarly, we chase fleeting pleasures, accumulating possessions, achieving milestones, only to find the initial surge of joy dissipates, and the new circumstance becomes the new normal. The exhilaration of a promotion, the delight of a new acquisition, the profound relief after overcoming adversity. These are potent, but their emotional resonance is temporal, susceptible to the insidious process of adaptation. This perpetual striving, this Sisyphean task of maintaining an elevated state of bliss, reveals a profound truth about human nature. Our desires are insatiable, our capacity for adaptation boundless. What once constituted luxury quickly becomes necessity. What once inspired awe becomes mundane. The treadmill forces us to confront the ephemeral nature of external gratifications, exposing the futility of basing our enduring happiness solely on the accumulation of pleasurable experiences or material gains. It suggests that the pursuit of external more is a quixotic quest, an endless cycle of desire, acquisition, adaptation, and renewed desire. The very mechanism designed to help us cope with adversity, our adaptability, also serves to normalize joy, preventing sustained euphoria. Thus, the hedonic treadmill compels a deeper inquiry. If lasting happiness cannot be found in the external world, if every peak inevitably recedes into a new baseline, then perhaps true contentment lies not in the frantic pace of the chase, but in the cultivation of inner states, in a profound appreciation for the present, or in the pursuit of meaning and purpose that transcend the transient oscillations of pleasure and pain. It is a quiet, profound challenge to our innate assumptions about what constitutes a good and fulfilling life. It is a peculiar tyranny, the hold of the past over the unfolding present. This cognitive bias, so seemingly simple in its definition, reveals a profound human struggle, the inability to detach from investments already made, regardless of their future prospects. It is not merely about money, though that is its most common manifestation. It extends to time, to effort, to emotional energy, even to the very fabric of one's identity in a chosen path. One finds oneself caught in a psychological quagmire, continuing a project, enduring a relationship, clinging to a career path, not because it holds genuine promise or joy, but because so much has already been poured into it irrevocably. The sheer weight of what has been expended becomes a gravitational pull, resisting the rational assessment of what should be done next. There is an inherent, deeply unsettling discomfort in acknowledging loss, in admitting that previous decisions, however well-intentioned, have led to a dead end. To abandon ship feels like a confession of failure, a validation of wasted effort, and the human ego recoils from such stark self-appraisal. Instead, we double down, hoping that just a little more investment will somehow redeem the irredeemable, that the past will retroactively justify itself through future success. This is the insidious whisper of irrational hope, conflating persistence with wisdom, when often it is merely the stubborn refusal to embrace reality. The true cost, then, is not merely the resources already sunk, but the invaluable opportunity cost of future possibilities foregone, the freedom to pivot, to innovate, to choose a path unburdened by the ghosts of past expenditures. It is a testament to our profound aversion to regret, paradoxically leading us into deeper pools of it, blinded by the very investments we fear losing. In this dance with the past, the present becomes merely a hostage to a history that refuses to die, perpetually seeking vindication rather than forging a new, unencumbered future. The mind, in its relentless quest for efficiency, often prioritizes accessibility over accuracy, constructing its understanding of the world from the most readily available data. This cognitive shortcut, the availability heuristic, reveals a fundamental aspect of human perception, our tendency to overestimate the likelihood or frequency of events based on how easily examples or instances come to mind. It is not the cold, statistical truth that dictates our judgment, but the vividness, recency, or emotional resonance of a memory or a narrative. A dramatic news report of a plane crash, for instance, might disproportionately inflate our perceived risk of flying, overshadowing decades of safe travel statistics, simply because the image of the catastrophe is so powerfully etched in our consciousness. A personal anecdote of a rare success story, perhaps from friend to friend, might lead us to believe such outcomes are far more common than they are, inspiring ill-advised ventures. This heuristic speaks to the profound influence of the anecdotal, the sensational, and the easily recallable over the systematic, the statistical, and the comprehensively evaluated. Our internal landscape of what comes to mind becomes the flawed proxy for external reality. It shapes our fears, our prejudices, our sense of what is normal or probable, and even our assessment of our own capabilities. The constant barrage of media, which by its nature highlights the exceptional and the dramatic, feeds this cognitive bias, creating a distorted mirror of the world. We mistakenly equate the ease of recall with the frequency of occurrence, the vividness of an image with its statistical weight, and the emotional impact of a story with its representative truth. In this way, our understanding of risk, of societal trends, of even personal capabilities, becomes a subjective construct built not on comprehensive data, but on the most prominent mental echoes. It is a testament to the mind's pragmatic nature, favoring speed and ease of processing, yet simultaneously illuminating the subtle ways our internal biases craft the very reality we perceive, often leading us to judgments that are swift but profoundly mistaken and deeply resistant to the quiet logic of facts. The anchoring bias, a subtle yet profound distortion of human judgment, speaks to the inherent fragility and manipulability of our rational faculty. It is the quiet tyranny of the first number, the initial impression, the seemingly arbitrary data point that, once encountered, latches onto the mind like a deep-sea anchor, tethering all subsequent deliberations. We believe ourselves to be creatures of logic, weighing evidence with impartial scales, yet this cognitive heuristic reveals a profound vulnerability. Our judgments, far from being independent constructions of pure reason, are often mere adjustments from an initial, often irrelevant, starting point. Imagine a negotiation. The first offer, however audacious or conservative, establishes a psychological baseline, influencing the entire trajectory of the discourse. often to the detriment of objective valuation. It is not merely about numbers. It extends to opinions, historical narratives, even self-perception. The first description of a person, the initial diagnosis, the inaugural assessment of a situation. These become the gravitational centers around which our subsequent thoughts orbit, unable to fully escape their pull. This bias exposes the mind's deep-seated need for a reference point, a cognitive shortcut to navigate the boundless ambiguity of information. Rather than constructing a judgment from scratch, which demands significant cognitive effort, we prefer the easier path of incremental adjustment. The tragedy lies in the insufficiency of these adjustments. We rarely stray far enough from the initial anchor, even when new, contradictory evidence emerges. This phenomenon underscores a fundamental philosophical question. How truly free are our thoughts, our decisions, if they are so easily swayed by the accidental primacy of a single piece of information? It suggests that our rationality is often bounded, operating within a framework subtly, unconsciously, yet powerfully predetermined by the very first glimpse of the world. It is a quiet testament to the mind's susceptibility, a constant reminder that even our most earnest attempts at objectivity are often subtly, insidiously, swayed by the initial whisper of data. The halo effect, a fascinating and pervasive cognitive bias, illuminates the human mind's innate yearning for coherence and simplicity, often at the expense of nuanced perception. It is the tendency for a positive or negative impression in one area to spill over and influence our judgments of an individual's or even an entity's unrelated traits. We witness a single virtue, perhaps beauty, eloquence, or a charismatic demeanor, and our minds, seeking to complete the picture, unconsciously paint an entire canvas of presumed excellences: intelligence, integrity, competence, kindness. Conversely, a single perceived flaw can cast a long, dark shadow, tainting our assessment of all other attributes. This effect speaks to a deeper philosophical truth about human judgment. We are not merely objective data processors. We are storytellers, pattern seekers, always striving to construct a consistent narrative. It is cognitively easier to believe that an attractive person is also inherently good, or that a highly successful company is also ethically sound, than to grapple with the complex, often contradictory, reality of fragmented attributes. The halo effect blurs the lines between distinct categories of evaluation, substituting genuine assessment with a generalized aura. It is why a charismatic leader might be perceived as more competent than their track record suggests, or why an individual with a perceived physical flaw might struggle to have their intellectual merits fully appreciated. This bias challenges the very notion of objective meritocracy, revealing how deeply our perceptions are colored by superficial or singular impressions. It exposes the subtle tyranny of appearances, the way a single shining facet can blind us to the duller, more complex truths beneath. In a world striving for fairness and impartial judgment, the halo effect stands as a persistent whisper, reminding us that our evaluations of others, and even of ourselves, are often less about discrete virtues and more about the generalized glow or shadow cast by a few prominent, often unexamined, characteristics. The paradox of control illuminates a profound irony inherent in the human condition. The more intensely we strive to command certain internal states or spontaneous processes, the more elusive they become. It is a subtle, almost mischievous subversion of our conscious will, revealing the limits of our dominion over the deeper currents of being. Consider the universal struggle to fall asleep. The harder one tries to drift into slumber, counting breaths, relaxing muscles with forced intent, the more wide awake the mind often becomes. The very act of willing sleep pushes it further away, transforming a natural, effortless surrender into a tense, frustrating performance. This is not merely an anecdotal observation. It speaks to a fundamental truth about how consciousness interacts with the non-conscious realms of our existence. This paradox extends far beyond the bedroom. It manifests in the pursuit of happiness. The more directly one grasps for it, the more fleeting it seems. In creativity, the forced generation of ideas often yields banality, while inspiration frequently arrives unbidden. In social interactions, the desperate need to impress can lead to awkwardness, whereas genuine connection blossoms from ease. The underlying mechanism seems to be the very hyper-awareness and anxiety that intentional effort can induce. When we consciously try to do something that is best done by allowing, we introduce a layer of self-observation and performance pressure. This transforms a natural flow into a scrutinized act, creating an internal friction that obstructs the desired outcome. The mind, in its attempt to control, becomes its own impediment, caught in a feedback loop of effort and failure. It is a testament to the wisdom of Wu Wei, the Taoist principle of non-action, not as idleness, but as action aligned with the natural flow, free from excessive striving. The paradox of control gently reminds us that some of life's most precious experiences are not to be coerced but invited, not to be wrestled into submission, but to be met with a certain yielding, a recognition that true mastery sometimes lies in the art of letting go. It is in that delicate surrender that control, ironically, is sometimes regained not through force, but through a deeper form of acceptance. Paradoxical intention stands as a testament to the human spirit's capacity for self-transcendence, a counterintuitive therapeutic strategy born from the crucible of Viktor Frankl's logotherapy. It posits that by actively willing or even exaggerating the very symptom one fears or wishes to overcome, the power of that symptom can be profoundly diminished, even dissolved. It is a defiant act of confronting anxiety not with avoidance or struggle, but with a playful, almost absurd embrace. Imagine a person paralyzed by a fear of public speaking, terrified of stammering or forgetting their words. Paradoxical intention would encourage them, not to try harder to speak flawlessly, but to consciously intend to stammer, to try to forget their lines, even to make a grand spectacle of their supposed failure. The genius of this approach lies in several layers of psychological alchemy. Firstly, it disarms the fear by removing its element of surprise and its power over the unknown. When one deliberately wills the dreaded outcome, the anxiety born of its potential occurrence loses its grip. The individual shifts from being a victim of their symptom to an agent actively orchestrating it. Secondly, it introduces an element of humor and self-distancing. By inviting the symptom, it is often revealed as less catastrophic, less potent, even ridiculous. The anxious energy, previously trapped in a cycle of avoidance and reinforcement, is diverted and diffused through this act of playful defiance. The neurotic cycle, where the fear of the symptom causes the symptom, is thereby broken. Frankl observed that it is often the anticipatory anxiety, the fear of the fear, that proves most debilitating. By intending the very thing feared, the individual steps outside this vicious circle, asserting their freedom to choose their attitude towards their suffering. It is a profound philosophical statement on human agency. We may not always control what happens to us, but we retain the ultimate freedom to decide how we respond to it. Paradoxical intention, therefore, is not merely a clever technique. It is an affirmation of the human capacity to rise above circumstances, to find meaning even in defiance, and to reclaim agency through the surprising power of intentional surrender to the absurd. It is a fascinating, often unsettling testament to the intricate and sometimes contrary nature of the human will. At its core, this subtle art of influence operates by advocating a belief or course of action precisely opposite to the one truly desired, banking on a predictable human tendency towards psychological reactance. When an individual perceives their freedom or autonomy to be threatened by a direct command or overt persuasion, there often arises an innate, almost defiant impulse to assert independence by doing the very opposite. This isn't merely childish obstinacy. It speaks to a deeper philosophical truth about the self's constant negotiation with external authority and its inherent craving for self-determination. The brilliance, or perhaps the cunning, of reverse psychology lies in its indirectness. It does not command, it subtly provokes a desired rebellion. It manipulates the very mechanism of our resistance. Consider the child told not to touch the wet paint, whose hand is then inevitably drawn to it, or the individual implicitly dissuaded from pursuing a course of action, only to find themselves more compelled by it. This phenomenon reveals that our choices are not always pure, rational calculations of utility, but are deeply entwined with our perceived freedom, our identity, and our aversion to being controlled. It suggests a shadow side of autonomy, where the desire for agency can be exploited by an understanding of its vulnerabilities. Philosophically, reverse psychology forces us to question the authenticity of our choices when they are a reaction to a carefully constructed external impetus. Are we truly free when our rebellion is precisely what was intended? It blurs the lines between genuine self-assertion and a sophisticated form of manipulation. It highlights the paradox that the more overtly one attempts to control, the more resistance they might generate, and, conversely, that a skillful withdrawal of control can be the most potent form of influence. It is a mirror held up to our own deep-seated need for independence, revealing how even our acts of defiance can, under certain conditions, be orchestrated. It is a reminder that the human mind, in its quest for freedom, can sometimes be its own unwitting agent in a carefully laid psychological trap. This profound cognitive phenomenon speaks to the inherent isolation that often accompanies deep understanding, a peculiar burden that knowledge itself can impose. It describes the difficulty an expert, once possessing a specific body of knowledge, experiences in recalling or imagining what it was like to not possess that knowledge. Consequently, they struggle to communicate effectively with novices, to empathize with their lack of comprehension, or to explain complex concepts in simple, foundational terms. The path to mastery, while illuminating for the individual, simultaneously dims the light on the journey of the uninitiated. It is not a failing of empathy in the emotional sense, but rather a cognitive empathy deficit. The expert's mind, having woven an intricate tapestry of interconnected facts, principles, and intuitive leaps, finds it nearly impossible to unravel this fabric back into its individual threads for the benefit of another. Concepts that are self-evident, obvious, or foundational to the expert remain opaque, disconnected, or bewildering to the novice. The expert's internal landscape of knowledge has become so thoroughly integrated that the scaffolding and intermediate steps that once supported their own learning are no longer visible, let alone accessible for externalization. Philosophically, the curse of knowledge highlights the subjective and often unshareable nature of lived understanding. It posits that knowledge, once deeply embedded, transforms the very lens through which we perceive reality, making it difficult to step outside our own cognitive framework. It is a testament to the fact that while information can be transmitted, true understanding, the internal reordering of concepts and the cultivation of intuition, is a deeply personal and arduous journey. It challenges the very notion of frictionless communication, revealing the inherent chasm between minds that operate on vastly different levels of conceptualization. The expert, in their profound grasp of a domain, inadvertently becomes a prisoner of their own insight, unable to truly bridge the gap to those still navigating the initial darkness. It is a poignant reminder that the summit of intellectual achievement, while offering a panoramic view, often obscures the winding, difficult paths that lead from the valley below. This paradox stands as a profound and often painful contradiction to our modern obsession with seamless success and linear progress. It posits that failure, the very outcome we are conditioned to fear and avoid, is not the opposite of success, but its most essential and formative ingredient. Society frames failure as an endpoint, a verdict on capability or worth. Yet, its true nature is that of a crucible, a purifying, strengthening process without which genuine growth, resilience, and ultimate mastery are impossible. The architect does not design the perfect structure on the first attempt. The scientist does not prove a hypothesis without countless null results. Each failure is not a dead end, but a critical data point, an unflinching mirror reflecting a flawed assumption, a weak point in a strategy, or a necessary pivot in direction. It is the raw, unfiltered feedback of reality. Philosophically, the paradox of failure challenges our very definition of strength. We imagine strength as the absence of falling, but it is truly found in the act of getting back up, armed with new knowledge. A life devoid of failure is not a life of triumph, but a life of stasis, a life unlived because the risks necessary for profound achievement were never taken. Failure strips away the non-essential. It cultivates humility, and it builds a form of wisdom that cannot be taught, only earned through experience. It reveals that the path to the summit is not a clean, upward slope, but a jagged ascent, marked by stumbles and setbacks. In our desperate attempt to avoid the pain of falling, we risk never learning how to truly climb. It is a testament to the humbling truth that our greatest triumphs are often built directly upon the foundations of our most spectacular failures. This presents one of the most fundamental and counterintuitive truths of the human experience, that the very state we are culturally conditioned to perceive as weakness is, in fact, the wellspring of our greatest strengths. Vulnerability, at its core, is the act of exposing oneself to the possibility of emotional or psychological harm. To be seen without armor, to speak one's truth without guarantee of acceptance, to love without certainty of reciprocation. This exposure feels like a liability, a dangerous lowering of our defenses. Yet, herein lies the paradox. It is only from this state of openness that true connection, trust, and courage can emerge. The armor we wear to protect ourselves from hurt is the very same barrier that isolates us from love and belonging. It prevents anyone from seeing us for who we truly are. True courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it. Similarly, true emotional strength is not invincibility, but the willingness to be vulnerable. It is the currency of genuine human connection. When a leader admits a mistake, they are being vulnerable, and in doing so, they foster trust and psychological safety far more effectively than by projecting an aura of infallibility. When we share our fears and imperfections with another, we create the space for empathy and intimacy to flourish. Philosophically, the paradox of vulnerability forces us to confront the isolating nature of our self-protective instincts. It suggests that the fortress of the self, built to keep out pain, inadvertently becomes a prison. To be vulnerable is to embrace the inherent uncertainty of existence and to find strength not in fending it off, but in meeting it with an open heart. It is the courageous admission that we need others, that we are imperfect, and that we are willing to risk being hurt for the far greater reward of being truly known. In the labyrinthine corridors of the digital age, a peculiar and profoundly unsettling paradox unfolds: the willing surrender of privacy in the pursuit of convenience. It is not a forced capitulation, but a subtle, almost seductive dance where the individual, lured by the siren song of frictionless existence, gradually divest themselves of their intimate data. One clicks agree to endless terms and conditions, accepts cookies without a second thought, and shares personal moments across platforms, all in exchange for instantaneous access, personalized recommendations, and the seamless flow of daily life. The convenience offered, whether it's faster checkouts, tailored news feeds, or effortless social connection, acts as a potent opiate, dulling the latent unease about the unseen collection analysis, and monetization of one's digital self. This paradox speaks to a deeper philosophical quandary concerning the nature of freedom and agency in a technologically mediated world. Are we truly free when our choices are subtly nudged, our desires anticipated, and our behaviors predicted by algorithms nourished by our own data? The erosion of privacy is not a dramatic event, but a creeping normalcy, a death by 1,000 clicks, where the boundaries of the self become increasingly porous. What begins as a seemingly innocuous trade-off for a minor benefit accumulates into a vast, intricate profile, a digital doppelganger that may know us better than we know ourselves, dictating our perceived needs, shaping our perceptions, and influencing our decisions. The true cost is often invisible, paid not in currency, but in the subtle loss of autonomy, the potential for manipulation, and the chilling prospect of a world where anonymity is a luxury and dissent becomes algorithmically detectable. The paradox reveals a fundamental human inclination to prioritize immediate gratification and ease over abstract, future-oriented concerns about surveillance and control, leaving us to ponder the very essence of what it means to be a private individual in an ever more interconnected, transparent realm. The Jevons Paradox, a concept as counterintuitive as it is profoundly unsettling, illuminates a perverse outcome in humanity's pursuit of efficiency. Initially observed by the English economist William Stanley Jevons in 1865 concerning coal consumption, it posits that as technological improvements increase the efficiency with which a resource is used, the rate of consumption of that resource, paradoxically, tends to increase rather than decrease. The very innovation designed to conserve often leads to greater overall depletion. For instance, more fuel-efficient cars might not lead to less gasoline consumption if the reduced cost of driving encourages people to drive more or to purchase larger, more powerful vehicles. Energy-saving light bulbs might not reduce electricity demand if their affordability leads to more lights being left on or to new applications where lighting was previously deemed too expensive. This paradox challenges the simplistic notion that technological fixes alone can solve pressing resource and environmental crises. It unearths a deeper, often insatiable human propensity towards growth and expansion, driven by economic incentives and behavioral responses. When a resource becomes cheaper to use due to increased efficiency, its effective price drops, stimulating demand. This can lead to existing users consuming more, new users entering the market, or new applications for the resource emerging that were previously uneconomical. The rebound effect, as it is often termed, can negate or even overwhelm the initial efficiency gains. Jevons' paradox compels us to confront the intricate interplay between technology, economics, and human behavior. It suggests that our efforts to optimize resource use, while laudable in intent, can inadvertently accelerate consumption if not coupled with broader systemic changes, such as effective pricing mechanisms, regulatory frameworks, or fundamental shifts in societal values concerning consumption and growth. It is a stark reminder that progress, when viewed through a narrow lens of efficiency, can sometimes be an illusion, pushing the true limits of planetary resources further out of sight, yet bringing them closer in reality. A peculiar shadow cast upon the otherwise seemingly orderly landscape of economic thought, this paradox whispers of a world where scarcity bends the very logic of desire. It is a counterintuitive anomaly, an instance where the immutable law of demand, that as price rises, demand falls, inexplicably falters. Imagine, if you will, the plight of the utterly destitute, subsisting on the cheapest, most basic staple, say, coarse bread or potatoes. For such a soul, every coin is a weighty decision, a constant negotiation with the very edge of existence. When the price of this very staple rises, conventional wisdom suggests they would seek alternatives, perhaps a slightly more expensive but ultimately better substitute. But the Giffen good reveals a deeper, more agonizing truth. The small increase in price for their primary food source, while seemingly minor, consumes an even larger proportion of their already meager income. This leaves them with less real purchasing power, less money for all other, slightly more expensive, and perhaps more palatable goods they might have occasionally afforded. A meager portion of meat, a bit of fruit. Unable to bridge the widening gap to these superior substitutes, and facing a starker reality of their diminished overall purchasing power, they're paradoxically compelled to allocate an even greater share of their remaining funds to the very item whose price has ascended, the Giffen good. It becomes not a choice of preference, but a desperate calculus of survival, a grim necessity. The income effect, the crushing weight of their reduced real income, dramatically outweighs the substitution effect, the minor impulse to seek a different, equally cheap alternative. It is a profound testament to the contortions that extreme poverty inflicts upon human choice, transforming what we perceive as rational economic behavior into a stark, almost tragic, act of bare subsistence. The Giffen Paradox, thus, serves as a somber reminder that the elegant models of supply and demand, while illuminating, often fail to fully capture the raw, unyielding complexities of human experience at the margins of existence, where necessity, not desire, dictates the fundamental architecture of demand, revealing the limits of our neat economic theories when confronted with the stark realities of human deprivation. This concept unfurls as a poignant narrative of collective demise, a stark parable concerning the inherent fragility of shared resources when confronted by the relentless calculus of individual self-interest. Imagine an open pasture, a common land, upon which many herdsmen graze their livestock. Each herdsman, acting with impeccable rationality from his own perspective, recognizes that adding one more animal to his personal herd will yield him a direct, tangible benefit. More milk, more meat, more wealth. The cost of that extra animal's grazing, however, is diffused across the entire common, a minuscule burden shared by all. It is a cost externalized, diluted, seemingly negligible to the individual. Therefore, the individual profit overwhelmingly outweighs the negligible individual cost. This logic, compelling and self-serving, leads each herdsman to add more and more animals. What begins as a rational, incremental decision for one becomes, when replicated by all, a catastrophic spiral. The pasture, overgrazed and depleted, eventually yields nothing for anyone, a barren testament to a collective failure. The tragedy lies not in malevolence or malicious intent, but in the aggregation of individually rational choices leading to a collectively irrational and ultimately ruinous outcome. It is a profound meditation on the limits of unbridled individualism, questioning whether a society built solely on the pursuit of personal gain can sustain its shared foundations. The commons, in this context, extends far beyond mere land. It encompasses the very air we breathe, the oceans, the climate, public infrastructure, shared digital spaces, and even the shared trust within a community. This tragedy illuminates the fundamental tension between the immediate gratifications of liberty and the long-term necessities of collective survival. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that without some form of governance, some agreed-upon constraints, or a deeper understanding of our interconnectedness, our seemingly logical individual actions can inadvertently pave the path to a shared desolation. It is a call for transcending the narrow confines of ego, recognizing that true flourishing often demands a stewardship that extends beyond the fence lines of personal property and into the boundless expanse of our mutual future. The voting paradox, or Condorcet paradox, unveils a profound and unsettling truth about the nature of collective decision-making. It demonstrates that even when every individual within a group holds perfectly rational and transitive preferences, if it is preferred to B and B to C, then is preferred to C, the aggregation of these preferences through simple majority rule can lead to a cyclical social preference. Imagine a scenario where option is preferred by a majority over B, and B is preferred by a majority over C, yet, paradoxically, C is preferred by a majority over A. This circularity, a kind of collective irrationality, means there is no single option that can definitively claim to be the will of the people or the clear winner when put against all other alternatives. The very concept of a stable social ordering collapses. This paradox, first articulated by the Marquis de Condorcet in the late 18th century, lays bare the inherent fragility of democratic ideals when confronted with mathematical realities. It challenges the notion that aggregating individual rationalities automatically yields a rational collective outcome. Instead, it suggests that the very process of voting can, under certain conditions, obscure rather than reveal a clear societal preference, leaving the outcome susceptible to the order in which votes are cast or the specific voting mechanism employed. It forces us to ponder whether a true, general will, as Rousseau might have conceived it, can ever truly emerge unblemished from the cacophony of individual desires. The implications stretch far beyond mere election mechanics. They touch upon the very foundations of social choice theory, revealing a fundamental limitation in our ability to translate diverse individual preferences into a coherent and stable collective decision. It implies that any outcome, even if reached democratically, might not be truly representative of a stable societal choice, but rather an artifact of the method. This challenges the notion of an objective best policy or leader emerging from a democratic process, suggesting instead that the winner might simply be the one who wasn't caught in the vortex of cyclical preferences. It is a quiet, mathematical whisper that questions the very notion of an enlightened, rational collective, reminding us that even in perfect individual order, collective chaos can lurk beneath the surface. The paradox casts a long shadow over the aspirations of perfectly rational governance, hinting at an irreducible complexity in the human desire for common purpose. The Easterlin Paradox offers a profound interrogation into the very nature of human flourishing and the often unquestioned pursuit of economic growth. At its core, it reveals a peculiar disjunction. Beyond a certain threshold, increasing national wealth or per capita income does not correlate with a corresponding long-term increase in a nation's average happiness or subjective well-being. While individuals within a country might report higher happiness as their personal income rises relative to others, and while richer nations tend to be happier than very poor ones, the paradox demonstrates that over time, as entire nations become wealthier, their average happiness levels tend to plateau or even remain stagnant. It challenges the intuitive belief that more money universally equates to more happiness. This counterintuitive finding, first articulated by Richard Easterlin in the 1970s, compels us to look beyond simplistic materialistic understandings of contentment. It suggests that our internal metrics for happiness are not fixed absolutes, but are constantly recalibrated by two powerful psychological forces: adaptation and social comparison. We adapt remarkably quickly to new levels of wealth. What was once a luxury soon becomes a norm, and our aspirations reset upwards, a phenomenon often termed the hedonic treadmill. Concurrently, our happiness is deeply influenced by our relative standing within our social group. It's not just about what we have, but what we have compared to our neighbors, peers, or the idealized lives projected around us. Chasing ever greater wealth in a society where everyone else is also getting richer can become a zero-sum game for subjective well-being. The Easterlin Paradox thus invites a philosophical re-evaluation of societal priorities. If endless material accumulation does not deliver lasting collective contentment, then perhaps the true wellsprings of happiness lie elsewhere, in strong social bonds, meaningful work, a sense of purpose, health, security, and a balance between personal ambition and communal well-being. It suggests that a society singularly focused on GDP growth might be missing the very essence of human flourishing. It is a quiet rebellion against the economistic view of progress, a reminder that while material comfort is necessary to escape suffering, it is not, beyond a certain point, sufficient to secure joy. The paradox whispers that our desires are not merely for more, but for better, and that better might reside in realms far removed from the ledger books of national accounts. This paradox serves as a stark and profoundly counterintuitive rebuke to our faith in simple addition and intuitive solutions. It demonstrates, with mathematical certainty, that under specific conditions, adding a new road or pathway to a network in an attempt to improve traffic flow can paradoxically make the overall travel time worse for every single participant. This unsettling phenomenon lays bare the treacherous logic of complex systems, where the pursuit of individual self-interest can lead to collective detriment. The paradox arises not from any physical flaw in the new road, but from a flaw in our human assumptions about choice and efficiency. When a new, seemingly faster route is introduced, rational, self-interested drivers will abandon their old routes in favor of this apparent shortcut. However, this collective shift in behavior overloads the new path and its connecting arteries, creating unforeseen bottlenecks that did not previously exist. The system, once in a stable, if imperfect, equilibrium, settles into a new, less efficient equilibrium where everyone's journey is longer. Philosophically, Bayes' paradox is a powerful metaphor for the dangers of localized optimization at the expense of systemic health. It reveals that a system is not merely a sum of its parts, but an intricate, often invisible web of interdependencies. An improvement to one component can trigger a cascade of negative consequences throughout the whole. It is a humbling lesson in unintended consequences, challenging the very idea that more options invariably lead to better outcomes. It suggests that our relentless drive for individual advantage, a cornerstone of classical economics, can be self-defeating without a holistic understanding of the entire system. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that sometimes the most effective way to improve a network is not to add to it, but to strategically take something away, a conclusion that defies all common sense, yet remains an undeniable property of our interconnected world. The Cobra Effect stands as a stark, often darkly humorous, parable of unintended consequences, a testament to the unpredictable and often perverse outcomes that can arise from well-intentioned interventions in complex systems. Born from a colonial anecdote, a British administrator in India offering a bounty for dead cobras to reduce their population, only to find locals breeding cobras for the reward, thus exacerbating the problem. It transcends its origin to become a universal caution. At its core, this phenomenon reveals a fundamental flaw in policy design that fails to account for human adaptability and the power of incentives. When a solution is framed around a specific metric or reward, individuals, being inherently rational and resourceful, will often find ways to optimize for that metric, even if it means subverting the original, broader goal. The policy doesn't just address the problem. It reshapes the environment, creating new incentives that can inadvertently foster the very behavior it sought to extinguish. This isn't merely a failure of foresight. It's a profound lesson in systemic thinking, highlighting how linear cause and effect reasoning falls short in dynamic, adaptive environments. It forces a contemplation on the nature of control, suggesting that attempts to engineer human behavior through simplistic reward structures can unleash unforeseen feedback loops, spiraling into a situation far worse than the initial problem. The Cobra Effect serves as a philosophical mirror, reflecting our own ingenuity in exploiting loopholes, our capacity for perverse optimization, and the humbling truth that true solutions require a deeper understanding of the intricate, often counterintuitive, interplay between policy, human nature, and the emergent properties of complex social fabrics.